Inserting the memory card and battery. Before you can use the camera, you'll need to insert the memory card and battery. First, locate the door on the side of the camera. Using your finger, push the latch up and then pull the door open. It may be a little hard to open the latch the first few times, but it will get easier. Then, insert the SD card into the card slot with the label facing the battery compartment. I like to push it into place using my thumb and forefinger. Then I use my thumbnail to insert it in the rest of the way. To remove the microSD card, simply push the card in to eject it with your thumbnail. Then use your thumb and forefinger to pull it out. Let's put it back in. Next, we will insert the battery as shown. Notice the little battery pins or connectors on the bottom of the battery. They line up accordingly with the inside of the battery compartment. Don't worry, they'll only go in one way. Charging the battery in the GoPro. To charge the battery in the GoPro, use the included USB-C cable to connect your GoPro to a computer. When the red status light is on, the battery is charging. When it goes out, the battery is charged. The battery takes around 3 hours or less to charge, depending how drained it is. After charging is complete, remove the cable and make sure you close the door securely. The latch must click into place to make your GoPro waterproof up to 33 feet. Initial camera setup and updates with the app. Now that the battery is fully charged, let's set up the camera for the first time. I'll press and hold the power mode button on the side of the camera for a few seconds to turn it on. By touching the screen, you will be asked to choose your language. Agree to the legal stuff and turn on GPS. Then, to finish setup, you should download and install the GoPro app on your smartphone. The app is now called QUIK, and I found it on the App Store for my iPhone and installed it. I opened the app and gave it all the needed permissions for photos and network. Then I tapped, "Yep, I have a GoPro." Then I hit Pair my GoPro. I allowed Bluetooth use. Then I tapped Connect your GoPro. The app searched and found my GoPro. Then I tapped Connect Camera. Next, I selected Pair. On the next screen, I could change the name of my GoPro, but I left it as is and tapped Save New Name. The app showed that I needed to update the GoPro, so I tapped Update Camera. Then I tapped Update and accepted the legal disclaimer. I then tapped Join. The app transferred files to the camera and then installed the latest update. When I got to the All Set screen, I tapped Done. Then I tapped Let's Go. At the Control Your GoPro from Your Phone screen, I tapped Try It. Then I tapped Enable Preview, Continue, and Join. Not only was my camera updated, but I could see a preview of my GoPro camera on my phone, plus GoPro controls. It's a very easy app to use. Now let's move on to operating the GoPro without using the app. Formatting your memory card. Before you can start capturing content, you will need to format your memory card. Swipe down on the back screen, then swipe right. Select Preferences. Then scroll down to Reset and tap it. Then select Format SD Card. Press Format and your card will be formatted and ready to use. Navigate back using the back arrows 2 times. Then swipe up to get back to what I like to call the home screen. Capturing photos and recording time-lapse or videos. Before we go any further, this is just a simple note that anytime you want to take a photo or start or stop recording time-lapse or video, press the shutter button on top of the camera. Playing back media on your GoPro. To review pictures or video, simply swipe up on the screen and your last video recorded will begin playing. Tap in the middle of the screen to pause the video. The checkerboard-looking icon lets you look at thumbnails of your recorded media. There's a sound on or mute speaker icon that you can tap. There's also a scroll back and forth through a clip button with a slider control. In addition, there's a trash icon for deleting clips. There's also a playback speed button which allows you to view your shot in real speed or in slow motion. There's a highlight button to tag a favorite moment. Swipe down to get back to the home screen. Now that that's out of the way, let's explore some settings and how to navigate through the GoPro menus. The 3 modes. Remember, if you press and hold the power mode button on the side of the camera for a few seconds, it will turn the camera on and off. But this button also has a second use. If you press the mode button on the side of the camera quickly, you can cycle through the 3 modes on the camera. They are photo, time-lapse, and video. You can also cycle through the modes by simply swiping your finger across the screen, left or right. Video mode. You'll notice the little video camera icon at the top middle of the screen. We have the battery life indicator on the top right, and the indicator that tells us how much record time we have left based on our current video settings on the top left. And of course, if we press the shutter button on the top of the camera, we will start recording video. Video on-screen shortcuts. Digital lenses shortcut. Like in the photo mode, we have the digital lenses shortcut button. If we press it, we get the following options. SUPERVIEW, which is very wide and the edges of the image are quite curved. It's a classic GoPro look. Then wide, which is a little less wide and a little less curved. After that we have linear, that is tighter and has no curvature. Then we have linear horizon leveling. When this is selected, the GoPro tries to keep the horizon in the shot level, even if you are not holding the camera level. It does a really good job, as you can see. Then we have narrow, which is a much tighter digital lens. I'll set it back to wide. SLO-MO shortcut. You'll notice a shortcut button with an 8x on it. This is the SLO-MO shortcut. 8x refers to 240 frames per second slow motion. Next we have 4x, which is 120 frames per second slow motion. 2x is 60 frames per second slow motion. Then we have 1x30, which is 30 frames per second normal speed. Finally, we have 1x 24 frames per second normal speed. So why can normal speed be 24 or 30 frames per second? It's a creative choice. 24 frames per second is the frame rate that movies are shot at. Therefore, it's cinematic looking. 30 frames per second has less of a traditional film look to it, but it may be a little smoother at capturing fast-moving action. Some people can't tell the difference. The choice is yours. Touch Zoom shortcut. We have our touch zoom shortcut if we want a digital zoom in from 1x to 2x. HYPERSMOOTH shortcut. HYPERSMOOTH is our next shortcut. This is a way to quickly turn image stabilization on and off. When HYPERSMOOTH boost is on, the image from the GoPro is similar to using a gimbal. Camera shake is drastically reduced, nearly eliminated at times. The only negative is that it does crop the image a bit when it's on, but I think it's worth using if you're not using a tripod and doing a lot of movement. HYPERSMOOTH examples. Here's a shot with no HYPERSMOOTH. You can see it's not very steady. Here's a shot with HYPERSMOOTH 3.0 on. It's certainly better. And finally, here's a shot with HYPERSMOOTH Boost, the strongest stabilization setting. It's pretty impressive in my opinion. Modifying on-screen shortcuts. By the way, we can change the on-screen shortcuts if we want to by pressing and holding one of them until a slider comes up. The slider allows you to switch to a different shortcut. The upper right shortcut button doesn't have to be HYPERSMOOTH Boost, for example. You can change it to anything that you please. Video presets. Next, let's tap the big black button to go into video presets. There are multiple options here. The first one is standard. This is an all-purpose video mode for shooting 1080p at 60 frames per second. The digital lens is set to wide. Activity. Use this preset to capture activities. It's 2.7K resolution at 60 frames per second. The digital lens is set to SUPERVIEW, so it has a very fisheye look. Cinematic. This mode captures 4K video with a linear plus horizon leveling digital lens. It doesn't have that over-the-top fisheye lens look. It's very film-like. And SLO-MO. This mode is great for capturing fast action shots in 1080p at 240 frames per second. There's a plus button under the existing presets where you can create your own preset. Best settings, preferences, and test footage. Modifying a video preset. You can modify the existing presets by tapping on the pencil next to the preset's name. I definitely suggest doing this so that you can capture the best image that you can from your GoPro. Let's select Cinematic, for example. The first thing we can change is Res FPS, which means resolution and frames per second. Let's change the Cinematic preset's resolution from 4K to 5K, which is the highest resolution that this camera records. Then, let's change the frame rate to 24 frames per second. That's the frame rate that Hollywood shoots in. Now let's navigate back using the back arrow at the top. Next, let's change the sharpness by selecting it. It's set to high. The other options are medium and low. In my opinion, I think that GoPro images are too sharp on high, almost in an artificial way. So let's change it to low. You may prefer medium. It's up to you. Let's go back and then scroll down to bitrate. The preset is at standard. In my opinion, you should never shoot with a bitrate at standard. Change it to high to get the best quality image. In fact, I would change that on every preset that this camera offers. Let's go to ISO max. I like to lower this to 800. It forces the camera to not go to a higher ISO. 1600 ISO, in my opinion, is noisy. I don't like to have to use it unless I have no choice. Next, let's change EV Comp. This is where you can change how your GoPro automatically exposes your footage. You can make it brighter or darker. I'll set it to -0.5 because I think that the GoPro always overexposes the image a little too much. In fact, I often set this to -1. It's up to you. Next, let's change color. I like to use flat so that my video is not overly saturated or too contrasty. If I need to adjust things, like color and contrast, I'll do it while I'm editing my footage after it's been shot, not bake it into the file. If you don't plan on color correcting your footage later, you could leave this setting on GoPro, and the high saturation, high contrast GoPro look will be baked into your footage. That's all of the modifications I will make in the cinematic preset. If you end up hating your modified preset, you can scroll all the way down to the bottom and tap Restore, and the default settings will reset to the way they were before we made the modifications. Test footage. Let me show you some footage examples at various resolutions and frame rates. This chart shows my favorite resolutions to shoot in. Generally, you want to shoot in the highest resolution possible, However, not all frame rates are available in each resolution. So if you want to record a high frame rate slow motion shot, for example, you may need to shoot at a lower resolution to achieve it. Let's look at some test footage. Here's a 5K 24 frames per second example, scaled down to 4K. 4K is the resolution that this entire video is in. Here's a 5K 30 frames per second example, also scaled down to 4K. Here's a 4K 60 frames per second example. Here's a 4K 60 frames per second example in slow motion. Here's a 2.7K 120 frames per second slow motion example, scaled up to 4K. Here's a 1080 240 frames per second slow motion example, also scaled up to 4K. Here's a 4K 60 frames per second slow motion example going into water. I must say, I'm pretty impressed with the footage coming out of this GoPro. Here's a tip. The sensor on the GoPro is pretty small, so to get the best out of your camera, shoot in a lot of light. Darker images sometimes become noisy. Additional settings. There's a few other settings I want to show you. HINDSIGHT. HINDSIGHT can be turned off, set to 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Basically, it records videos for those sets of times before you press the shutter button to begin recording video. It's meant to capture video that you may have missed by pressing the shutter button too late. If that happens to you a lot, you may want to turn this feature on. Shutter. Shutter is the next setting. I leave it on auto most of the time, but you can set it as high as 1/1920th of a second. Shutter speed has to do with motion blur in your image. If shutter speed is too low, movement in your shot will be blurry. If it's set too high, motion blur is greatly reduced, which can look unnatural. The rule for proper motion blur is to set your shutter speed to twice the frame rate. So if I'm shooting 24 frames per second, a good shutter speed would be 1/48th of a second. With GoPro footage, I personally don't mind high shutter speeds, so I leave this on auto most of the time. You may disagree. I will say that if you want to shoot in slower shutter speeds outdoors, you will need to purchase ND filters. ND filters are like sunglasses for your camera. White balance. Next we have white balance. It goes as high as 6500 degrees Kelvin and as low as 2300 degrees Kelvin. It's a setting that coincides with the color of different light sources. Daylight is often very cool or blue to our camera, and candlelight is very warm or orange to our camera. If I'm shooting during the day in sunlight, I set my white balance to 5500 degrees Kelvin for a very natural look with good color rendition. If you're shooting under a different lighting source or multiple lighting sources, and you don't know what color temperature to set your camera to, you may want to leave this setting on auto. You could also eyeball it using the information on this chart as a starting point. This chart includes many different light sources and their respective color temperatures. You can manually dial in these settings on your GoPro. Raw audio. The next setting I want to discuss is raw audio. When raw audio is set to high, the camera records a separate high-quality and highly processed audio wave file. The medium setting is similar, but with less processing. The low setting is similar, but with even less processing. If you want to use this extra high-quality audio file, you will need to sync it up in an editing program like Adobe Premiere Pro. If you don't want to bother with that, you can just use the audio that's married to your video clip. Set raw audio to off in that case. Here's an example of raw audio high. This is raw audio high. This is raw audio high. And here's an example of raw audio off. This is raw audio off. This is raw audio off. Wind reduction. Wind reduction is our next setting. The available settings are auto, on, and off. I usually leave this in auto. It's not perfect, but it does help your audio sound better when it's windy outside. Here's a quick test I recorded in front of a fan. This is with wind reduction off. This is wind reduction set to off. This is wind reduction set to off. This is with wind reduction on. This is wind reduction set to on. Exposure control. Sometimes your GoPro doesn't do a good job with exposure. This can often happen when shooting a scene with extreme bright and dark areas. You can show the GoPro what to expose for and lock the exposure if you wish using exposure control. Tap and hold the middle part of the screen until the spot meter appears. Basically, your GoPro will expose for whatever that spot meter box is over. So if we want to expose for the bright window in our shot, drag the spot meter over it. If we want to expose for the figurines on the shelf, drag the spot meter over them. If you want to lock the exposure, simply tap and hold on the spot meter box and a lock will appear. Press the checkbox to go back to the home screen and then you can record like normal. To unlock the exposure, just press and hold the middle of the screen. The spot meter will return, but it won't be locked. Press the X to exit exposure control. How to get your GoPro footage onto your computer. To transfer your GoPro footage to your computer, swipe down on the GoPro touchscreen. Then swipe right. Tap Connections. Then tap USB connection. Then select MTP. Then navigate back to the home screen. Power off your GoPro. Now, using the included cable, connect it to your GoPro and then connect the other end to your computer. I'll press and hold the power mode button on the side of the camera for a few seconds to turn it on. If you have a PC, your GoPro should show up on your computer. If you have a Mac, click on the magnifying glass icon at the top right of your menu bar on your computer screen. A spotlight search pops up on screen. Type Image Capture. The Image Capture app will open, and you will be able to connect to your GoPro and import your footage onto your computer using the app's controls. Another option is to just remove the micro SD card from your GoPro, put it into the adapter, and then plug the adapter directly into your computer if it has an SDXC card slot. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.